and I split that 71 acres into 10 different parcels, and I sold those parcels off, and it was one of my most profitable deals. I made multiple six figures. Welcome to the Ryan Rice Show, where we talk about what we learned yesterday that we can apply today so that we can be better tomorrow. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. You've come across a property with some acreage, maybe an acre, 10 acres, 50, 100, and you want to know, one, if you have the ability to split the land, and two, if you do have the ability, what are the steps that you need to take in order to split it? And if you split land, it is almost always going to be worth more than if you keep the land in one parcel. So if you have the ability to split the land into additional parcels, it is almost always going to be worth more because you give additional buyers the opportunity to live on the same amount of land, and each buyer is going to be able to pay more than if one buyer were to pay for one entire parcel. Why am I talking about this? I just wrapped up over the last 13 months a big land deal where I acquired 71 acres and I split that 71 acres into 10 different parcels, and I sold those parcels off, and it was one of my most profitable deals. I made multiple six figures, and so I'm going to share with you everything that I learned, all of the steps that I think you should be aware of, and how to evaluate whether or not you can split your land, and then what the steps are going to be to do so. So let's dive right in. I think first and foremost, what you need to know is what are your county regulations? And the biggest things are going to be zoning. What's the property currently zoned for? And some common examples of zoning are residential, commercial, agricultural. It's likely that if you have some acreage, that your land will be zoned agricultural. And you need to understand that if you split the land, does it need to be rezoned? And if so, into what zoning category does it need to be rezoned? And so the very first thing that you want to do is understand what the land is currently zoned for, and then just reach out to the zoning department and see if the zoning department in the jurisdiction where the land is, every zoning department, you can just Google whatever county, whatever city, zoning department, and you're going to be able to call them and get someone on the phone and just ask them a question. You'll be able to find what the property is currently zoned for on the county auditor site. And so if you just Google whatever county you're in, auditor, you can type in the address most likely, and you're going to be able to tell what the property is currently zoned for. And by calling the actual zoning department, they're going to be able to tell you if you were to split the land, what it needs to be zoned as, and do you have the ability to do that? And that's definitely the starting point, because if zoning is an issue, then you're not really going to be able to move much further. And you have to make sure that if you are splitting your land, it's zoned correctly. The next thing, if you have a piece of land that is closer to I'll say suburban or even urban level development, it's likely that the county or the city is going to have what's called a long-term comprehensive plan. In other words, the city or the county knows where all the vacant land is in the area, and they're going to have in mind what they think should be done with that land based on what the county's or city's goals are. Is the county trying to work on more affordable housing? Is the county trying to bring more single-family housing on half-acre lots? There is going to be some sort of plan where people in charge of the county have looked at all the vacant land and have said, hey, based on our goals as a county, here's what we think this land would be best used for. And they're going to have that plan for it. And so when you call zoning, if the property has the ability to be rezoned and the zoning department says that, yes, you can split this land, here's what you would need to do, the next step would be to understand what the county or the city's long-term comprehensive plan is. And if you just ask them, that's a very common term at the county zoning office. And you would just ask, hey, what's the long-term comp plan? And that's typically what they call the long-term comprehensive plan. They call it the long-term comp plan. And they'll give it to you. They'll send you exactly what it is, and they'll tell you kind of what they were thinking for this land. So let's assume that now you've talked to zoning. Zoning has said yes, it can be rezoned if you need to rezone it, or it is the proper zoning, and you have the ability to split it. What you need to know next are what are the rules, right? And some of the most important rules are going to be how many feet of road frontage do you need? So if your land, for example, fronts a lot of road, and what I mean by road frontage is how much of your land is directly adjacent to the road that it comes in off of. So if you have land that is, and not much of it at all, is directly adjacent to a road, or let's say you have land and it is what I would call a flag lot, where you have a very small driveway and it's kind of a skinny driveway for a while, and then it opens up into this big, expansive property, then you're not going to have a lot of options, because in order to split land, you need access off of the road where it comes from. And the more road frontage that your property has, the more valuable its potential is, because that means if you split the land, each parcel is going to be directly off of that road. If you have a lot of land that does not have much road frontage, you could have limited options unless you were to build a new road, and that is extremely expensive. So knowing how much road frontage that your property that you're trying to split has is super important. And then knowing what your minimum road frontage needs to be when you split land is also important, because, for example, let's say you have a property and it has 1,000 square feet. It has 1,000 linear feet of road frontage. Well, let's say in this particular area, zoning says that when you split into additional lots, each lot has to have a minimum of 250 linear feet of road frontage. Well, that means the maximum amount of lots you're going to be able to split that lot into is 4, because 250, the minimum requirement, times 4 is 1,000 feet of road frontage that you currently have. And so a lot of times your road frontage is going to dictate how many different parcels you're going to be able to split it into. And in my particular example, in the deal that I did, I actually had the 71 acres on the south side had one road, and the entire lot fronted the road all the way back. And then on the north side of the property, there was another road that it kind of V'd off of, and the entire property fronted that road as well. And so there were a lot of options for my parcel, because my 71 acre property had a lot of road frontage, and it had road frontage on 2 different parcels. And so I was essentially able to take advantage of both roads and split that large parcel into a bunch of different lots, because we had a ton of road frontage. So you understanding how much road frontage you need, and when evaluating, the more road frontage that you have, the more flexibility and the more dynamic you're going to be able to be with your lot split. Next is you're going to want to understand what is your minimum lot size. So for example, when I split my lot, we had a minimum lot size of 2 acres. And because of that's how it was zoned. And so I knew that I couldn't split any lot into under 2 acres. When we drew out our split, we had to make sure that each lot was a minimum of 2 acres. And so understanding what your minimum lot size needs to be can also help you calculate, well, how many lots can I split it into? You want to understand what are your driveway requirements. So again, for example, in my deal that I did, one road had a 55 mile an hour speed limit and was a state road. The other road had a 45 mile an hour speed limit and was a county road. Each of those roads, because one was regulated by the Department of Transportation and the other was regulated by the county, each of them had different driveway rules. In other words, on one road, there was a rule that each driveway had to have a minimum of 400 feet of sight distance. In other words, when you're driving on the road, you had to be able to see the driveway 400 feet in advance to ensure good quality safety rules. And so if there was curvature in the road or there was something that was preventing a driveway from being seen, then you can't put a driveway there. Why that's important is because if you divide lot into a parcel and you can't put a driveway there, that means you're going to have to share a driveway with another lot, and that's going to devalue the lot a little bit, but you can still get it done. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But understanding what your driveway requirements are can help you evaluate what kind of potential lot split that you might have. And then the last thing I would say to kind of think about high level to be able to evaluate your deal is there a maximum on how many lots that you can split in one calendar year? And so in this particular jurisdiction, for me, I was only able to split 4 lots plus the remainder lot. So a total of 5 lots once it was done in one calendar year if any of those lots were under 5 acres. And so I ended up having to do 3 separate splits, one with all of the lots over 5 acres, and then I did 2 separate splits with the lots that were under 5 acres because there were more than 4. And so making sure that you understand that every jurisdiction is going to have different rules that can really mess up your underwriting and your timing. If you have, let's say 100 acres and you say, oh, I'm going to break this 100 acres into 10 acre parcels. Well, if your jurisdiction has a rule that you can only do 5 splits in one calendar year, then you want to make sure that you're planning for that. And so you can ask your zoning department or your auditor's office, hey, is there a maximum on how many splits that I can do in one calendar year? And basically the point of that rule is your jurisdiction or your county just in most cases is going to want to limit if you are doing like a subdivision, well, that's a whole different story, right? I did not do a subdivision. That is a completely different process. And by making those rules of only splitting, 4 lots plus the remainder lot in one calendar year, they are preventing a developer from coming in and doing some very, very large development without the proper requirements. And so making sure that you understand that is super important. And again, you can get all of this information by simply calling the zoning department. Next, you want to know if a township is involved. And so what is a township? In a lot of rural areas, they're governed by local townships, and which means there are these they're all volunteers, but someone that lives in the township is going to be in charge of the township and is going to be in control of approving any lot splits that are going to be happening in that area. And they're going to have these little rules, right? So like, for example, one of the rules that the head of the township in my area had was that any lot that I divide, it couldn't be more than 4.5 times the width of the road frontage. And so again, for example, if I had a lot that I was splitting and it had 100 feet of road frontage, then that lot couldn't be more than 450 feet long. And so making sure that you, again, understand those small dynamics are important, because the last thing you want is say, oh, I have this 70 acre parcel. I can draw the lots that are most conducive for me to make money. And then I do this drawing and, you draw out 10 lots that all have a 5-to-1 width to length ratio. And then you send it to the planning department. They say, oh, sorry, we can't do this. And then you have to redraw the whole thing. So again, making sure that you understand those little dynamics of what the county requires. Is there a township? If there is a township, what kind of rules does the township have? Because you want to make sure you can follow those rules. Another example of a small rule that my township had is there couldn't be more than one structure per parcel number. And so for people that wanted to build like a pole barn on their property, they couldn't do that without a specific variance approval from the township. And it's important for you to know those things because, again, that's going to affect the value of those parcels. Once you kind of have an idea, that summarizes a lot of the diligence on the front end that you want to put in to see, one, if you have the ability, and then two, what are the rules. And then once you know the rules, you're going to be able to at least come up with an idea of how to best split the map. And what's really cool, what I did, the jurisdiction that I was in had what's called a GIS. It stands for Geographical Information Systems. And so if you type in county GIS, a lot of counties will have this, and it's a feature where you can go on and essentially pull up a map. And some of these maps, you can draw on, you can take measurements. So this specific GIS in this specific jurisdiction, once I understood what the rules were, I pulled up my parcel and I just started drawing different parcels that fit the rules. And then I kind of got an idea of like, okay, here's, I know nothing about splitting land, but at least this is a plan that abides by the rules. This can start to create an idea of what I can do with it. And so I did that. And then I went and I started pulling comps and I started like putting all those numbers together. So once I understood the zoning, what I was able to do, and then I understood some of the details of the rules, and then I kind of put a basic map together of what I thought might be some sort of sufficient split. I reached out to a local real estate agent who knew land really well. How did I find her? I literally just went to Zillow and I pulled all the land listings in the past 2 to 5 years. And I looked for names that I saw over and over again, right? So I think I called 5 real estate agents whose names I saw over and over again on land. One of them happened to pick up the phone. And I think in this case, I got lucky because I got a really, really good one. She picked up the phone. We had a great conversation. I sent her over that little map that I put together off of the GIS. And she gave me a rough estimate of her values based on comps. And she sent me comps and she sent me a CMA, which stands for comparative market analysis. So she pulled other land comps and other acreages. And based on that, she gave me a breakdown like, hey, I think the map that I drew had like 7 or 8 lots on it. Here are the 7, 8 lots based on what you drew. Here is a value that I think you might get. And so after I did that, I looked at it and was like, yeah, I think there could really be something here. This could be really, really valuable. Real quick, as you guys know, I just recently started this podcast. If you could give it a rating with a quick tap of the thumb, that would mean the world to me. And even more importantly, it could help spread the word to a broader audience, which in turn could help change a life. Thank you so much, and let's get back to the show. And so after I understood what the rules were, understood what it was that I needed to do, had a real estate agent give me some idea of value, I then wanted to get the process started to actually put this to paper. So your next step is going to be, you're going to want to have a great surveyor on your team. And a land surveyor is someone that is actually going to go out to the property and put physical stakes in the ground. They're going to do a drawing. They're going to submit the drawing to the county. They're going to answer the county's questions. That in terms of formally splitting the lots, your surveyor is going to be the one who actually does that. And in my specific jurisdiction, this jurisdiction had a list of approved surveyors. And so your jurisdiction may have a list that you can reference. And that's what I did. And I just called a few of them. And then I reached out to some people in my network as well. So for example, the real estate agent that I worked with, because she knew land well, she had a surveyor that she recommended. That's the surveyor I ended up using. And he happened to be on the list of approved surveyors in this jurisdiction. And so there's a few different ways that you can find surveyors. I think reaching out to your network is one, asking your real estate agent for referral, or asking the jurisdiction for their list of approved surveyors. You can probably find a good one off of that. And some things to look for when you pick a surveyor. And I didn't know this at the time. I had a reference and I was like, yep, I need somebody. Let's rock and roll. Looking back, what I would have told myself if I was in those shoes again is how to evaluate how good a survey is, how good a surveyor is. And the way that you can evaluate how good a surveyor is by, one, you want to make sure that they have experience with this jurisdiction. And then two, go talk to their references, right? Go talk to people that have worked for them before, get examples of surveys that they have done for ideally some sort of similar project that you're working on, and ask what the pain points were, what did they do well, what should I be aware of, and those types of things can help you get ahead of anything. So the role of a surveyor is really important, and mine was good, and I got a good surveyor. But what I learned in terms of how important the surveyor is that if your surveyor is going to submit information to a jurisdiction, let's say they go through the process, they go out to the property, they set a bunch of stakes, they do all these drawings, they put a ton of man hours that they're going to charge you for, right? And then they put this survey on paper, ton of legal descriptions, lots and lots of work, thousands and thousands of dollars. They're going to put that together and they're going to submit it to the county. The problem is if the surveyor is not super familiar with the rules in that jurisdiction, the county is going to send back a lot of questions, or they're going to send back a lot of changes, and then your surveyor is going to have to fix them and then resubmit, and then you're going to have to wait till your packet gets to the top of the stack again. Then they review it. Then if there are more questions, they got to send it back, so on and so forth. And so you really want to pick a surveyor that has experience in this jurisdiction and is very familiar with the rules, because otherwise it could significantly expand your time horizon. Once you got a good surveyor and that is in motion, you're going to want to understand from your jurisdiction if any of your lots are going to require soil tests. And so in my specific deal, any lot that was under 5 acres needed what's called a soil test. And basically what that is there's a soil engineer who comes in and says, hey, this is the type of soil that you have, which means based on that type of soil, this is what type of septic system that you can put in, right? So if you're working with land that has direct access to public utilities, public water, public sewer, then you won't have this issue. But if you're working with a very large parcel of land and you're not doing some sort of big development, it's likely that your parcels that you're splitting are going to have septic systems on them and maybe well water on them, in which case your jurisdiction may require some soil tests. So again, in my jurisdiction, any lot that was under 5 acres required a soil test. And how to find a good soil engineer. Again, at this point, I had my real estate agent, I had my surveyor, I had the jurisdiction. You're going to be exposed to a lot of people that are very familiar with all this stuff. So just ask them for a recommendation. That's how I found mine. He ended up being great. I had to get soil tests on 3 of my lots, and they went out. They were able to get it turned around within like a week or two. So as you start to get all of this going, and let's say that your surveyor puts together a survey and they submit the survey to the county. And so to recap where we are big picture, we have learned what the property is zoned for, what I'm able to do, what are the requirements. I've drawn out some sort of rough map. I've reached out to a real estate agent to understand the value. I've talked to a surveyor. The surveyor is starting to put together a plan. And I've started some soil testing. Well, now, once your surveyor has formally submitted your entire packet or your entire survey to the proper jurisdiction, your role is now going to be to facilitate everything that needs to happen. Because here was my experience. There were 5 different departments that I had to deal with, each of which had to approve different portions of my splits. And the 5 departments I dealt with were, 1, the map room at the auditor's office, is what it was called. The engineer's office, which the engineer will validate stuff like driveway locations, the size of your lots, etc. 3rd was the health department, which they managed the soil tests. 4th was the head of the local township, who approved some of those little local laws that might be in place. And then 5th was the regional planning office, which Regional planning was in charge of kind of putting their final stamp of approval. They were the final end all be all. They approved and oversaw all of the approvals that were done up until that point. They review all of those, and then they put the final stamp of approval. And once regional planning had the final stamp of approval, then we could take it down to the county to actually get it recorded so that the split could be done. And what I found through this experience is that these 5 different departments, number one, they didn't understand what each of the others' requirements were. 2, they don't communicate with each other, right? When the map room is done with their part, they just send it out in their intra-company mail. And then whenever it arrives at the next level of approval, then, the engineer's office, for example, it'll arrive in their mail. It'll just get in with their stack. Whenever their stack gets to the point where they can review yours, then they'll review it. Once theirs is approved, it'll go to the next step, and so on and so forth. And so what I found very quickly is that if I wasn't constantly in communication and I wasn't saying, hey, map room, just FYI, my team dropped it off. When do you think you might have it reviewed? And then they say, oh, we'll have it reviewed by this time. And then I would follow up. They would then communicate to me, hey, we just sent this to the engineer's office. I would say, hey, engineer, just a heads up, this is on its way. When do you think you might have a chance to review? And I would do that over and over and over. And so I'm constantly facilitating, communicating, because what amazed me about this whole process was that there's one jurisdiction, but these 5 departments, they don't talk to each other. They don't understand what each of the requirements are. It's just like, I'm going to do my thing. Once I'm done approving, I send it out, and then I have no accountability anymore, or I don't care when it gets done. It's not my responsibility. And so if you want to get this done with any sort of reasonable time frame, I would suggest at least communicating each step along the way, and understand from the beginning that there's going to be a lot of different departments that are going to be approving a lot of different things. And if you're not constantly communicating and facilitating, it can really, really slow down and can become very, very bureaucratic. And your timeline could take twice as long just due to that bureaucratic, what I would call downtime. So as you're going through this process and as you're getting towards the end, you are next going to need a really good attorney on your team. And the role of this attorney is going to be write new deeds for each of your parcels and then help with anything else attorney related along the way. Some examples of things that I experienced that I needed help with. I had to do a separate driveway maintenance agreement for each lot. So I had several lots that had to share different driveways. And of course, if there are multiple owners that share one driveway, there needs to be in writing an agreement that says, hey, who's responsible for building it? Who's responsible for maintaining it? What happens if one owner doesn't maintain or doesn't pull their weight? What happens if I want to sell it? There's all these different things that need to be outlined, and a good attorney who has experience writing these types of agreements you're going to need them on your team in order to do that. And an attorney that I had already worked with in this area had done these all the time, and so he knew exactly what needed to be done. And if you don't have an attorney like that, you could just ask your local title company, hey, do you know an attorney that is really, really good with land? They've done driveway agreements before. There's a lot of different ways that you can find an attorney. Likely your surveyor, your real estate agent, the jurisdiction may even have a recommendation. I had one that was already in my network, and it worked out really well. But those were the things that I needed an attorney with. I also, because I had multiple lots that were sharing one driveway, we had to do some easements that the attorney had to execute. And then there were also some deed restrictions on each of the lots. And so the township had some deed restrictions that he required me to put in my deeds. And then we also, at the recommendation of my agent, we put in some deed restrictions around a couple things in order to keep the neighborhood as desirable as possible for people that were buying those lots. We wanted to make sure that they felt good about the value of their lot and what they were buying into. So you've done all these things, right? I'm going to recap again just because there's so many different steps. You understand what you're able to do. You understand the rules. You got a real estate agent that has given you a value. You got a surveyor. You've done some soil tests. You are facilitating everything now that the survey has been submitted. You've talked to an attorney who is getting some of the legal descriptions and the driveway maintenance agreements and your deed restrictions and your deeds, is getting all that together. And once you get towards the end, now you're going to want to have said real estate agent start to market and list your properties. And again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have a really, really good real estate agent who knows land, who has done what it is that you're doing. Because, man, I'm telling you, I am so grateful for my real estate agent because she did a phenomenal job knowing this market, pricing the land in a competitive pricing environment, marketing it in a way that got significant action very quickly. And she was just instrumental in the process. And she was also an excellent negotiator. So every time we got offers on each parcel, because she knew land so well, I would always just ask her, hey, what do you think we should do? And she will say, hey, well, based on, the 100 land deals that I've done, here's what I would suggest. And that was so invaluable to me because I had never done land deals. And what she brought me in terms of negotiation was worth a ton because she brought a lot of insight that I didn't have. And that was extremely helpful. So just another plug for a really, really good real estate agent. If you don't have one and you try to do this on your own, I think there's going to be a lot of learnings and you're likely not going to get top dollar for your land because there's going to be so many different things. And if a buying agent knows more than you do and you don't have a good agent on your team, you're not going to maximize what you can generate in terms of income from these properties. And then when you get them all sold, man, enjoy. So that probably sounded like a lot. I know we've been talking about, for 30 plus minutes now, going through all of these steps. But those are all the things I learned and all of the steps and what you can expect when you're evaluating, splitting, going through this process. And when you finish all of it, man, it can be a relief because it can take a long time. But if you do it right, and if you have some really good players on your team, you have a good surveyor, you have a good real estate agent, you have a good attorney, you have a good soil test person, and you work well, and you can kind of understand the politics of the jurisdiction, and you can facilitate that in a good way, and you play politics well, then you have what it takes to do a big land deal and to split land and to make some significant profits. And there can be significant profits if you can do all of this. And this might sound, again, it's not difficult, but it's complex. There's a lot of moving parts. They're all interconnected, and you have to know how to operate them all. And you have to have those key players who know what they're doing and who do a really good job. But if you're willing to go through all of those things and you're willing to learn and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation that you've never been in before, then it can be really fruitful. This was by far my most profitable deal. Again, made multiple six figures, super rewarding. I cleaned up 71 acres that was a complete shithole for this jurisdiction. All of the neighbors, all of the jurisdiction, all of the cops who had been on this property. Yes, the cops have been on this property multiple times for the tenants that I had to evict. I mean, beyond the monetary reward, it felt really good because we made the community significantly better by doing what we did. And that part was really, really cool. And so not only can you get rewarded well financially, but you can make a county, you can make a city, you can improve the quality of life in that area, and you can put your stamp on that area. And for me, that was kind of a neat little experience and something that I wasn't expecting, but that ended up being something that gave me probably the most intrinsic value out of doing the whole thing. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you got some value out of that. If you did get some value out of that, please share it. That's the only way that this podcast grows, is you share it with people, they get value out of it, and then they share it with more people. But if you know someone that has come across some land and you feel like this might be helpful, shoot it over to them. And if not, that is fine as well. But love you guys. Thank you for your attention. I asked for a lot of it in this episode, but I hope I gave you guys the reward that you were looking for if you hung around long enough. So you guys enjoy, And until the next one, I'll see you. Peace.